Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Colin Miller will reflect on what Scripture reveals about mutual encounter, vulnerability, and the presence of Christ in the poor. My name is Erin Pierce, and I'm the publicist at Ave Maria Press. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions can be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel that you see here on the slide, and I'll read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you tomorrow via email, and please feel free to share it with colleagues, family, friends, whoever you'd like to. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Colin Miller is the director of the Center for Catholic Social Thought at the Church of the Assumption in St. Paul, Minnesota. Miller co-founded a Catholic worker house in Durham, North Carolina, where he lived and served for several years as a priest in the Episcopal Church. Under the influence of Dorothy Day, Peter Morin, Augustine of Hippo, John Henry Newman, and many homeless people, Miller was received in the Catholic Church in 2016. After teaching theology for 2 years, he relocated to Minneapolis, where he helped found the Morin House, a Catholic worker house devoted to common prayer, material simplicity, and service to the poor. Miller earned a Bachelor of Arts at the University of Minnesota, a Master of Arts in Religion at Yale University, and a PhD from Duke University. He lives with his family at the Morin House, a Catholic worker community in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Colin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, everybody, for having me and for coming. I have 5.2 children, and every night I put my children to bed in the exact same way, and my two of my children sleep next to each other in a bed, and every night I put them to bed like normal children, and they are sleeping when I leave them, and they are sort of sleeping next to each other in a normal way in a bed. And just about every night when I come back to them before, maybe 2 hours later, before I myself go to bed, it looks like there has been a bar fight in there, and people are crossed every which way over one another. They're strewn out. It looks like there's been a shooting, and I came in 3 nights ago or something like that, and one of them had their feet over the other one's face like this, and they were all asleep, and they've been asleep the entire time. They haven't woken up at all, because I would hear them if they had. So I don't know how this happens. At any rate, sometimes that is a good metaphor for my talks. So I am going to attempt to not do that today and to stick to my script. But if I do, then maybe Erin or someone can jump in and tell me, where are you? But no, we should be fine. So today I'm going to talk about encountering Christ in the poor. This is a chapter or a little bit of a remix of a chapter from my book with Ave Maria Press, We Are Only Saved Together. If you like what you hear today, go check out the book. I can talk a little bit more about the book maybe in the question and answer time. But the book is sort of a contemporary application of the principles and practices of the Catholic worker movement, illustrated by my experience trying to practice those in maybe the last 20 years of my life or so. So if you don't know anything about the Catholic worker movement, that's okay. It's an attempt to explain that and show how relevant it is for the church today. So what I want to talk about today, though, is a mode of encountering the poor. And I want to do that by talking about the parable of the Good Samaritan. I think this is a relatively common piece of scripture that people know, but it's a story. It's a story Jesus tells about when about a Jew who goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho and stumbles upon robbers and gets beaten up and left in the ditch. And along come two of the religious representatives from Jerusalem along the side of the road, and they pass by and they see the man in the ditch, and they don't do anything. They keep going. Finally, later down the road comes a Samaritan, and the Samaritan goes down to the man in the ditch, cares for him, puts the man on his donkey, and takes him to an inn and promises that he'll come back and take care of him at a later time if there are any expenses that he's not covered to date. And so this parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan, has a lot of sort of cultural purchase on us, I think. I'm just going to go ahead and put this whole slide out here so you guys can see maybe where we're going a little bit. But I think the usual reading of this parable is fairly straightforward. That Jesus has told us sort of a simple moral tale about how we should help other people. In other words, that Christians serve the poor by helping them, and that we should all go and therefore be the Good Samaritan, right? Isn't it simple? Go be Good Samaritans. And this has sort of a whole lot of cultural cachet with us and a whole lot of cultural power for us. I think people that don't even identify as Christians in any way sort of know what you mean when you say when you talk about the Good Samaritan, right? So we have Samaritan agencies, those who help the less fortunate by giving them things, and we have Samaritan laws, Good Samaritan laws, where if you're trying to help somebody out and something goes wrong, that you can't be held responsible. Why? Well, because you were trying to be a Good Samaritan. But what I want to suggest today is that actually this reading of the parable, that Christians serve the poor by helping them, is actually to get the parable exactly wrong. We can start to consider this by considering the identity of the Samaritan in the parable. So if we look at the Samaritan, we're told a bunch of stuff about him, which might remind us of somebody else. So the Samaritan comes from a far off place, we are told. He condescends or goes down to someone who is described as half dead. He puts oil and wine on his wounds. Think of the sacraments. He takes this man to an inn. Think church. And he promises that someday he's going to come back and make everything okay. Does that remind you of anyone? That's Jesus, of course. So Jesus has told us not a simple moral tale about how we should help people, which I don't know why anybody needs to be told that really in sort of a deep, profound way anyways. Don't we all grow up, even the worst of us grow up knowing that we should help people? Jesus has not told us a simple moral tale about how we should help people, but he's re-dramatized the whole story of salvation and put himself right where you would expect him to put himself, sort of right in the center of it. He's the centerpiece. He's the Samaritan. But what that makes me, where does that put me? That puts me in the ditch. I am not the Good Samaritan. I am the man in the ditch. And this makes sense within the context of the parable too in Scripture, because the Jews would identify with the Jew who went down and got beat up on the side of the road, not necessarily immediately with the Good Samaritan. So Jesus is the Good Samaritan. I'm not the Good Samaritan. I'm the one in the ditch. I am the one who is in desperate need of help and salvation. But this, of course, is just the Lenten gospel. This is nothing new to Christians, nothing new to Catholics. We are the ones that need saving. We are not the ones who have all the resources and the power and who can go and do it and save the world. So who's going to bring salvation? Jesus, of course. But the interesting twist, of course, to this parable is that Jesus makes himself a Samaritan. Let me put this slide up for you again. Now, what do we know about Samaritans? Well, we actually get a fair number of things about Samaritans in the Scriptures. But the Samaritans, of course, were the sworn enemies of the Jews. They were sort of their neighbors to the north, half Jewish, half pagan through a complicated history. But to a Jew, the Samaritan is sort of the most despised cultural outsider, sort of not only half Jewish, but sort of half human. We read in the Scriptures, Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And when someone wants to insult Jesus somewhere else in the Gospels, he says to him, or the Pharisees or the Sadducees say, do you not have a demon, and are you not a Samaritan? So it can actually be used as a term of derision. So the Samaritan is the person that you would never have a meal with. The person who maybe, if they were in dire straits, you could find yourself willing to help out of your own, overflowing supreme goodness, but never to be helped by a Samaritan. To have to be helped by a Samaritan would be sort of the ultimate humiliation, right? Think of the person you despise most in the world, and then imagine being in a situation where you have to receive help from them. So Jesus says, in his identification with the Samaritan, this is the one that you find salvation in. You find salvation in the one that you most despise, the outcast, the foreigner, the person you've tried to avoid being your entire life. Interesting twist that Jesus throws in there. Why does he identify with the Samaritan? Because he wants to underline the kinds of people that we find our salvation in. And I'm thinking here, of course, of the poor and the outcasts and those that we call marginalized. So where is the Samaritan today? Who are those people today? Well, it's not difficult to identify those that our culture thinks of in this way. Think of the guy flying the sign on the side of the road. Think of the folks at the homeless shelter. Think of the tent cities that, at least here in St. Paul, that spring up all over the place. These are the Samaritans. And Jesus says, here is where we find our salvation. The mentally ill, the deviant, the dangerous, the less fortunate, the marginal, anybody who you think of under these categories might be the person that you are to receive your salvation from. The stinky guy, the panhandler, the guy that talks weird. There are certainly other categories of folks too, but these are some of the most obvious ones. This is the Samaritan today, and so Jesus says this is himself. This is where God's salvation comes from. We are the ones in the ditch. And the question is, just like it must have been for the Jew, can we receive help from this person? Can we get beyond ourselves enough to see this person even as a person? So then the basic reversal that the parable implies for our usual way of looking at the parable, but also our usual way of looking at other people, is that, I'll put these all up again. We are not the helpers of the poor. We are not the benefactors of the poor. They are our benefactors because they are Jesus. Why is this hard? People in general don't like this. This, by the way, it's worth mentioning. This way of reading the parable is the way that the church fathers read the parable too. So I'm not just making this up, but read Augustine, read a couple of the Gregories, read the parable this way too. So this is a hard thing for us because helping the poor is actually attractive, right? Because everybody likes to do the good, everybody likes to be the do-gooder. Helping the poor, if we think of ourselves as their benefactors, we like to be in control. Helping is a position of control. We can also do it pretty comfortably. You know, you get pats on the back for helping the homeless, for giving out, you know, sandwiches or writing checks to Catholic charities or whatever it is. And all of those things might not be bad, but they do keep us as the clear social superior. Our status is still the higher status position. We get tax breaks, and if we want to, like I mentioned, we can do it at a distance. We can help the poor without changing our lives. But even more than that, we can help the poor as a way of justifying our lives. Because if we're trying to make the poor more like us, then the implication is that the way that we live must be a good way of living. And so it sort of underwrites our own comforts, our own social status, our own way of being in the world. And so it can kind of be comforting in a way. But what, of course, if the goal is not to make the poor, the outcast, the marginalized like us, but to make us more like them? And so here's the fundamental shift that I think that the parable is trying to convey, and that I talk about in a lot more detail in the book. So one of the, before I get into this, one of the, if you're not familiar with the Catholic worker movement, one of the main institutions that it's known for, or main practices that it's known for, is the founding of hospitality houses. Hospitality houses where Catholics would get together and have a house and welcome the poor into their house to receive food and shelter. And this created, sometimes I think accidentally, a sort of revitalized form of Christian community in a world where there's so often not a whole lot of Christian community. But it ended up being so much more than simply a transactional form of charity where you need shelter, please come in, I'll give you this bed for the night, you need food, here's a bowl. It amounted into the building of relationships where the Catholics who were providing the hospitality got to know the poor, and a community began to form. And so it moved from what I have here on the slide, a model of doing for, which is, I think, too often our model of charity, to being with. Doing for is by far our most dominant model of relationship with the poor in our society. What do you think of when you think of relationships with the poor? Well, you think that the poor are poor, so they lack something, so therefore I should do something with them. But this is actually not the case from a Christian perspective. There certainly will come a time when, if we have relationships with people, if we have something that they need, that will become theirs and not ours. But the first thing, first consideration from a Christian perspective, is that if the poor are Jesus, the first thing is to just be with them. And why is this? Well, being saved just is going to be being with Jesus. It's what heaven is. Salvation is being present with God, resting with God. It's what we're all doing. It's what all this stuff is about that we're all doing every day. Resting with God here and ultimately in the kingdom. This is what adoration, going to Mass, is. This is why we do it, right? Because it's heaven on earth. It's simply presence with God. And this is what we can have or be doing in being with the poor. Creating a life with the poor can actually be, I don't think that most of our bishops are going to give us permission to have tabernacles in our homes or in our church or in our in hospitality houses. But we can have the next best thing. We can have the tabernacle of Jesus, tabernacle of God in the poor. We can even make a whole life out of being with the poor and be with God all the time in that way. So Mother Teresa, famously talked about in the morning, she would go to Mass and receive Jesus in the Eucharist, and all day long she would get the privilege of going out to the streets of Calcutta and being with Jesus in the poor. Jesus famously says, you will always have the poor with you. And with you is with the church. So we have an opportunity in this parable to become a church about whom that's true. That we have Christ with us, not just in the Mass, not just when we're praying, not just in the word preached, not just when we're gathered together as the body of Christ, but have Christ in the poor too as another instance of his presence. So another way to simply name it is simply friendship with the poor, is I think what the parable is inviting us to. This is the first way that the Samaritan saves us. So that's kind of the overall picture, the general reversal of the parable, the new way of reading it. And if I had time, there are plenty of other scriptures that point in this direction that I would love to go over. But for right now, since this is a professional development workshop, I thought I would just talk a little bit about how to start in this kind of relationship with the poor if we find ourselves not maybe there yet. So the first thing is to do this with others. This can sound, befriending a homeless person, for instance, can sound like what's the word that I'm blocking right now? An intimidating thing. How would you go about doing this? But it sounds a lot less intimidating if you realize that the Gospels are addressed not to us as individuals, but to us as communities. So everything that I've been talking about today are things that we should think about doing with friends. I have been in the Catholic worker movement now in some way for 20 years or so, and been fellowshipping with the poor in some way for the majority of that time, mostly because it's so much fun, because I have such a good time with it, and I have such a good time with it in part because it's what I have ended up doing with my friends. So I have made lots of friends who are poor in this sort of a thing, but I have also done it with friends who are just regular kids who grew up in the suburbs like me. And you go out and you share the experience of getting to know some folks, and then you go back and you have a beer and you talk about what happened and how it went and what to do next, and you puzzle about it and you laugh about it. And so anyways, long-winded way of saying, this is supposed to be not a club that we hit ourselves over the head with, but something joyful and life-giving and fun that we do as parts of communities. And the only reason that I'm still doing it is because it's so much fun. Another piece of advice at a general level is just to start. There's no wrong answer here. There's no blueprint for how this has to go. We're so used to having someone tell us what are the next 3 steps for me to have a relationship with a poor person, or whatever the thing is in our life. Just if you have an idea right now, it might be a really good idea. Just start. One of the things to do is to, if you don't ever run into the marginalized in any way, shape, or form, put yourself in their way. The parable of the Good Samaritan is in response to a question about our neighbors. Neighbor means someone whom you are nigh to, someone who you are close to. So if on the way to work, or as you're walking around the neighborhood, or as you're taking your kids here and there, or whatever it is, you don't ever run into folks that we're talking about, the first step, just little baby steps, would be to maybe go to work a different way. Put yourself in the way of someone like that. Stop and give somebody $5 out the window. Talk to the person at the side of the road. All of this happens by, this is an important point that I didn't put on the slide. All of this happens by baby steps. None of us are where the Lord wants us to be right now, and all of us are getting there by little baby steps, and He's leading us by the hand on the way. So don't think you have to move into a Catholic worker house tomorrow. The book, by the way, and all of this is not about how we all have to become Catholic workers. The book and all of this is about how a new form of Christian life that is held out in one particular form by the Catholic worker communities are increasingly going to be the way that churches have to look as we move into our uncertain future together. So don't take all this as only applicable to people who are crazy like Catholic workers, or people who like the Catholic worker movement, or something like that. This is all, the whole point of the book is this is all for everybody. This is all for us average Christians. Okay, how much time we got? We're doing, all right, we got about 5 minutes. We can do this in 5 minutes. Always remember, when you're starting with this stuff, you're the man in the ditch. We all want to be in control. Resist that impulse. Live a little bit out of control. Expect awkwardness and failure. I'm going to give you some concrete examples in just a minute about how you might be able to start befriending some homeless people. But in all of this, guess what? The cross is awkward. The cross looks like failure. And that's okay. What else do we have to do before we die? Go out and look a little foolish for Christ's sake. It's okay. But expect that. And expecting it takes a lot of the pressure off. Be a holy fool. So finally, how to start. Here are just some ways that I've encountered folks like this in my own experience. And there's lots more examples. If you have questions about more examples, we can talk about it in the Q&A. One way that I've done this is have a breakfast fellowship at the rectory of the church every morning. So I've had a church that I talk about this in the book, that had a number of homeless people that lived on or near the grounds. And every morning, instead of going over to the grocery store next door and buying them breakfast, we just started bringing breakfast to the church, and we would invite them in, and we would eat cereal or eggs together every morning. Nothing highfalutin, no high demands. Nobody's becoming a saint in a day, but we are getting to know some people that we didn't know before. Another sort of related way of doing this is plan a lunch at the parish, and go out around your city with some invites. I just made little pieces of paper with the basic information about when you were going to have lunch and what's going to be there, and bring those out and just invite people. Just sow the seeds broadly and see who comes. And whoever comes, eat with them. Say this is us having lunch together. This is not me serving you food to fulfill a need. If anything, this is me eating with you to fulfill a need, my own need. And get to know people that way. That's worked too. Similarly, go get some sandwiches or some donuts and go to the park or encampment in your city where these sort of folks hang out. And again, eat with them. Set up some tables, sit on benches, don't have lines. That's another way of the being with thing. White flag nights in parishes, I've done this. Sometimes it gets cold at night and a shelter is not available, or some people can't go to the shelter for whatever reasons. Spread the word around that on particularly cold nights, you'll have somebody who's going to stay up in the rectory and get some mats and some blankets and have people sleep on the floor that night, maybe give them breakfast in the morning. Or you can shoot the moon. You can start a hospitality house. I've just heard about one here in the Twin Cities that is starting up. And hospitality houses can look very, very different from one another. There's no blueprint, no one model for a hospitality house. My hospitality, I have 5.2 children, like I said. I have my family's house is here. We have a hospitality house that has 3 or 4 formerly homeless people in it, and another family that I know now lives on the other side. That's one model, also with children. Hospitality houses can look different. You can all have the same house. You can all live in there. Figure it out. But it's it's another way of living with the poor. Another way, just before I close, and I know I'm almost there. I've been focusing on the poor and homeless population of cities and things, but there are other kinds of Samaritans, of the rejected and marginalized and excluded, of course. And one of these is of course the elderly. One of my jobs in my day job is to take communion and visit shut-ins, and we have a whole population of the world that is another category of Samaritans. You can get people together and visit care facilities and bring some joy to elderly people's lives, and that's Jesus as much as the poor is Jesus. And just in general, sort of the less programmatic you can make these things, the better, because if we make these things programmed and regimented and institutionalized, it necessarily takes away the personal character of it. And when that's the case, we tend to see people as numbers or issues or needs to be filled or problems to be solved, when the whole point of the being with model is this is a human being just like me, and it's a human being that I happen to find Jesus in. Okay, so I think I can stop right there and see what anybody has to say for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Colin. And as he mentioned, inviting all of your questions, ideas, maybe there are things that you are already doing in your community or in your parish that you would like to share with us. I'm going to go ahead and take back presenter mode. So as you have been talking about, this fundamental shift in our thinking, and I love the fact that you say baby steps, right? This takes time, but it's the intention of it. I imagine that is the most important.
Yeah.
So how would you say you and your family have been impacted by this way of life?
Yeah.
Or your community even?
Yeah, that's a good question. It has enriched it immeasurably. So we talk a lot today, and I talk some in the book about the difficulty in finding community today, real community, and how fragmented our world is, and why everybody feels alone and lonely and anxious and like nobody knows them. And quite accidentally, I found that this hospitality to the poor thing is a wonderful way of building and having community. And so, when I first started on this particular hospitality house venture that I'm currently working with or living in, it was sort of transactional in its beginning. So here are some people that need X, Y, and Z, and I can provide that through X, Y, and Z. But over time, friendships with folks grew. Other people from the community, including a lot of Catholic folks from the area, got interested and came around, and quite without meaning to, a community formed around my family and the other family who does this with us. And so I find myself just so thankful for the different kinds of friends that my children have, and all of the different folks that I get to know on a daily basis. A lot of different people come through, but I also get to know a lot of those people deeply, and that's been a real privilege.
Mm-hmm. Got a couple questions coming in here. How do you keep your mental health up when working with the poor and homeless? It's hard to not feel the weight of their problems and want to fix their problems.
Yeah. Let's see. So I think one way of addressing that question is to say, I think most of the time, the deepest part of my problems and the deepest part of other people's problems stems from a lack of belonging and a lack of stability in our lives that comes from community. And so you might not be able to fix X, Y, or Z that has developed itself over who knows how many years. But simply by being with another person, you can fix them and yourself sort of at the same time, just by listening. And of course, there are things that we will all find that we have to say no to as we get into this kind of stuff. But hopefully there are the kind of no's that lead to a bigger yes. Yeah, so that's what I say about that.
Yeah, yeah. So as you were talking, I could imagine that some people might feel overcome maybe by fear, right? To go into these communities that they're not familiar with, or maybe they don't feel like they belong, or hard to resist that sense like, okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to meet all your needs, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to serve you.
Yeah.
What advice or suggestion, or maybe how did you overcome that?
Yeah. It certainly does take a sense of a sensitivity to it, because a a tent community, a tent city, or whatever you want to call it, where there's a bunch of folks living together, um, it has its own kind of ownership to it and its own kind of space to it. And for people who don't have much of anything of their own sense of community can develop there. And if you just barge in with your donuts and fried chicken or whatever it is, that might not be received super well. And so you always want to approach it in a very sort of meek, outsider's way, knowing that you are an outsider. And you don't need to push anything on anybody. You can go to a homeless encampment and set up a table with chairs and donuts well outside of the domain of where they would be, and whoever comes walking by the smell of the donuts or whatever, allow yourself to go to form these relationships very slowly. And my sense is that the fear issue is largely a fear of the unknown. Certainly there can be issues that you'll want to be prudent about. But if you go in with some friends, that will lower the fear factor. If you keep yourself as the receiver of folks rather than as the fixer of folks, people are people, and most people are not aggressive or dangerous unless they feel put upon or metaphorically assaulted in some way. So don't metaphorically assault people with your good intentions. And most of the time, people will either just opt out and stay away, or you'll get the people that are interested.
I love how you really focused on the aspect of community, right? Because I think as we all reflect on our lives, maybe some of the most difficult times were made easier because of those around us. But also those joyful times were made even more joyful by sharing it with others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that those things don't happen overnight. It's a process.
That's right. No,
Yeah.
there's nothing, that's a really good point, Erin. There's nothing magical about what I'm proposing. There is sort of like a really deep level, but in terms of what it seems like as you're doing it, don't expect, I tell people all the time who are interested in coming over to one of our weekly dinners, if you come over to our house, because I always worry that they're like expecting some sort of grand Catholic worker hospitality house, so I'm really going to bond with the poor experience. And so I just say, look, I would love it if you came. What you're going to experience is eating dinner with some people who are just normal people and a bunch of kids that are going to be loud and distracting. And that's what it's going to be like having dinner at my house.
Right. So beware.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for sharing all of this with us. And we always offer a little discount for all of those who are with us today or view this later. Tell us a little bit more about the book, if you would.
Yeah. So what's a good place to start? So Dorothy Day and Peter Marin, founders of the Catholic Worker Movement, which began in 1933 in New York City in the height of the Great Depression. And as I mentioned a little while ago, one of the main things that the Catholic Worker is known for is the founding of these houses of hospitality, which sort of is a being with model of engagement with the poor, but had as I think often unintended side effect, the revitalization of Christian community. And so the book is about the parts of the Catholic Worker Movement that are applicable to all of us as Catholics every day, and that can become and should become a part of the church today. And this is all illustrated by some of my own experience. And I think that a lot of those principles and practices of the movement are the ones that oftentimes get left out of presentations of the faith today. Not just the being with the poor stuff, not just the hospitality stuff, but the book is sort of organized around the theme of community, and how if you pluck that out of the center of Christianity, you've really plucked out the heart of it in a way. And so it talks about community, the difficulties in community, hospitality, being with the poor. It also talks about there was a back to the land element of the Catholic Worker Movement that saw the being with the poor as actually organically connected with the way that we relate to the earth and the economic problems of the day. So it covers a variety of different topics, and so check it out and correspond with me. I'm always happy to hear from people.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I really think this would be an excellent read to do in small groups, men's group, women's group, families, maybe your small group in your parish, part of your St. Vincent de Paul Society or your Catholic social teaching group. I think it would really fit into all of those areas.
Yeah, sure. That's certainly who it's geared for the person who might not know anything about the Catholic Worker Movement or anything about Catholic social teaching, or necessarily be inclined in that direction. It's geared towards the person who wants to take their faith to the next level, but isn't quite sure how.
Right. Wonderful. Well, I invite all of you to take a look at this. And if you purchase at AveMariaPress.com, use code webinar0513 for today's date. Once again, Colin, thank you so much. Very, very inspiring and thought-provoking for sure.
Thank you.
So, yes, I invite all of you to join us next week. Timothy P. O'Malley is going to talk about Mary, and as the protagonist of a revolution of tenderness, something that Pope Francis often talked about. So perhaps these two actually collide more than we might imagine, right? On
Good planning.
Exactly. Divine providence.
That's right.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Erin.
Take care. Thank you.